You know, we talk a lot about history and how we kind of see it through a limited lens. And I always wonder how much we might have missed because of that. Like, what if the things we just dismiss as impossible today were, happening all along?
Hmm.
And that's kind of what we're diving into today. Triangular UFO sightings.
Oh, wow.
You might think, oh, that's just a bunch of blurry photos and stuff from the past few decades, right?
Yeah.
But I was blown away to find reports of these triangular objects. They go back way further, over a century.
Wow.
And we're not talking about just anyone claiming to see these things. Reports from military personnel, pilots, even scientists.
Yeah.
So you've given me this, mountain of research on this. And it's not just spooky stories. It's newspaper articles, declassified military documents, even interviews with, experts in aerospace. So let's unpack this, see what we can uncover.
Okay.
One of the things that really caught my eye was this quote from the Wisconsin State Journal. Way back in 1953, they just casually mentioned triangular UFO sightings. Way back in the Dutch East Indies in 1890.
Wow.
And England in 1894. That's before the Wright brothers even got off the ground.
That early date is so key, I mean, it throws out the easy explanation of, oh, it's a misidentified aircraft right out the window.
Yeah.
It forces us to consider that maybe, just maybe, there's something else going on.
So let's rewind the clock a bit. That 1890 Dutch East Indies sighting.
Okay.
They described this massive triangle, 100 feet at the base and 200 feet on each side.
Wow.
Then you have a British admiral in 1894 reports a large disk with a tail.
Mm.
And then in 1895, England and Scotland have a full-blown airship scare with all sorts of bizarre objects being reported, triangular ones included.
That's wild.
Yeah.
The fact that we can't just say, oh, it was a weather balloon or some experimental aircraft. I mean, these reports really force us to rethink our assumptions about what was technologically possible back then. What if, for example, we're thinking about it all wrong? What if heavier than air flight wasn't the only way to get something up in the air?
Okay. That's given me a lot to think about. And here's where it gets really interesting. There's this story from 1936 about a guy who saw a triangle as a teenager, but he didn't actually report it until, decades later. He talked about being afraid of being ridiculed, that no one would believe him.
I think that speaks to a bigger sociological piece of the puzzle. Cultural norms totally influence what people feel comfortable talking about. Think about it. Have you ever seen something you couldn't explain, but you were hesitant to tell anyone about it?
Oh, totally. Okay, let's fast forward now to the time when most people think about UFOs, starting with the 1950s. What I find fascinating is that a lot of these newspaper accounts, the witnesses are often named, they could be contacted. Does that, lend them more credibility, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. It gives us more to go on than just a vague story. And also the fact that these were considered newsworthy back then tells us that the public was genuinely interested in what was going on. These weren't just fringe ideas, they were making headlines.
Okay, let's dive into some of these cases from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. There are so many with just incredibly vivid descriptions and some interesting details. 1953, there's a sighting in Texas of a flying arrowhead. The description is so specific, it's hard to write it off.
And then you have Captain Howard's flying jellyfish case from 1954. He was a pilot flying over the Pacific, and this thing was shape-shifting right in front of him. How do you even begin to explain that?
And then in Camarillo, California, 1957, a triangle was reported moving incredibly slowly with the base forward.
It throws everything we think we know about how things fly out the window. It suggests that maybe there's something at work here that we don't understand yet.
And then the 1960s saw a ton of reports of these triangular sightings. Places like Connecticut, England. What gets me is that the shapes, the way these things behave, are consistent, even though they're being seen all over the world.
That consistency is a really important point. It points to something real and not just a bunch of random, isolated incidents.
Okay. This one's one of my favorites. In Kentucky, 1973, a dog started barking before anyone even saw anything. It's these little details that make me feel like, oh, I'm there,
Yeah.
And then there's the 1977 Memphis police chase. Giant triangle sighted over the city, multiple officers, radio chatter. It's almost identical to that 2000 Illinois case.
These cases, especially when you have multiple people seeing the same thing, are really tough to explain away as just people's imaginations or hoaxes. It starts to make you wonder, what if there's really something to this?
Okay, so we're starting to see some patterns emerge here. So tell me more about that.
Well, the most obvious one is the shape, right? Triangular, often with equal sides, sometimes more stretched out, sometimes they have things sticking out from them. People report these incredibly bright lights, usually white or red, and they're either completely silent or make barely any noise.
Right.
But here's the thing that really blows my mind. They can hover, move super slow, and then all of a sudden take off at speeds faster than anything we can build. And a lot of these objects are seen at low altitude, sometimes even seemingly interacting with the people who see them.
You mentioned earlier the Belgian wave. This wasn't just a couple of random sightings. I mean, the Belgian military investigated this. What can you tell me about that?
This case is a game changer. We have multiple radar confirmations, F-16s were scrambled, and they even recorded objects moving at speeds that our current technology just can't do.
Wow.
The Belgian authorities not only officially acknowledged that this was happening, they even talked to their NATO partners about it.
So if governments are taking this seriously, shouldn't we be too? It kind of makes all those other sightings seem more believable, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It makes it a lot harder to just brush this off as, oh, they're all hoaxes, or people are just misidentifying things. There's something else going on here.
Okay, now here's where things get really, really weird and fascinating, to me at least. You gave me this interview with Professor John Allen. This guy worked on top secret aerospace projects, literally designed hypothetical aircraft for the military. He wasn't like some UFO nut.
No, not at all. He was a brilliant scientist and a very practical guy, but he was open to the idea that there might be technology out there that, we just don't understand yet. His work was all about pushing the boundaries, about figuring out, what was possible, even if it seemed impossible at the time.
Okay, so walk me through this interview. What are the key takeaways here?
Well, one of the biggest things that stood out to me was his work on Project Greenglow, where he was actually tasked with figuring out anti-gravity propulsion for military aircraft. This was top secret stuff.
Wow.
He even came up with this mass dynamics theory. He admitted, the physics behind it were all hypothetical, but it allowed him to envision aircraft that could move just like the UFOs people were reporting.
So he was thinking about this stuff way before it was mainstream.
Yeah.
Even within the military. That's amazing. Anything else jump out at you?
What I found fascinating was his comparison to Leonardo da Vinci.
Okay.
Da Vinci came up with all these incredible ideas for flying machines, but the technology to build them didn't exist yet. What if we're in the same boat, Just starting to get a glimpse of technology that's way ahead of anything we can even imagine.
So you're saying we might be like, those early inventors looking at birds and dreaming of flight, while something else is already doing things we can't even comprehend.
Yeah, it's a pretty thought-provoking idea, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's this quote from Professor Allen that I remember. He said, "My physics is wrong. My physics doesn't exist." It really makes you think, like, what if our understanding of science and technology is just like scratching the surface of what's really out there?
It's a really humbling thought.
Okay. That's enough mind-blowing stuff for now.
Okay.
Let's bring it back down to earth a little bit.
All right.
Remember that 1968 sighting near Scott Air Force Base we talked about?
Oh, yeah.
That's right in your hometown, isn't it?
It is. Makes it a little more real, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Suddenly it's not some abstract thing happening out there, but something that happened right where I grew up.
So for everyone listening, well, let's refresh their memory on this case.
Well, the witness, who's still alive today, reported seeing this triangular object with a row of what looked like illuminated windows, all perfectly silent. And get this, he watched this thing for 20 minutes, even followed it in his car.
Wow.
He was so determined to figure out what it was that he went straight to Scott Air Force Base to ask if they knew anything about it.
Did they have any answers for him?
Not that I'm aware of, but think about how he must felt.
Yeah.
Seeing something that no one else believed, especially the authorities, and then, decades later, that 2000 Illinois case happens. When he saw that on the news, he said, "Holy smokes, these guys have seen the same thing that I saw," essentially.
It must have been pretty validating after all those years of people just dismissing his experience.
I bet it was.
So it really connects it all together, doesn't it? Over a century of reports all over the world.
Yeah.
And they all share that same thread.
Mm-hmm.
You gave me some files from the National UFO Reporting Center, and some of those accounts are like truly unsettling. There's the one about the mother in Washington State driving with her 6 kids in the car.
Oh, yeah.
She was so terrified after seeing a triangle that she wouldn't even go out after dark.
Those cases really highlight the emotional impact these encounters can have on people, This isn't just about some abstract concept or technology. These are real experiences that can be incredibly unsettling, even terrifying.
And the woman in Kirkland saw a triangle over her driveway.
It's crazy.
And then the four hunters in Idaho, they had an F-16 fly over their camp the next morning.
That's wild. It makes you wonder, was that F-16 a coincidence? Or was the military checking out what those hunters saw?
Okay. Before we move on, we have to talk about that Tinley Park case from 2004.
Yeah.
Not just because of all the people that saw it, but because of the video evidence.
Video analysis can be such a powerful tool because it can help us determine the size, the speed, the trajectory of an object. And when you have multiple videos from different people from different angles, it really strengthens the evidence. And in the Tinley Park case, they were able to estimate that this thing was much larger than any known aircraft.
That's incredible. So we have this massive triangular object silently gliding over this town, captured on video by tons of people. Where do we even begin to try to explain this?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's a challenge, to say the least. It really makes us examine what we think we know.
So you mentioned that the Tinley Park object was, like, estimated to be much larger than any known aircraft.
Yeah.
Based on the video analysis. How big are we talking?
Well, based on the different videos and the analysis that was done by a few different independent groups, it seems like it was anywhere from a few hundred feet across to, over 1,000 feet in diameter.
So that's huge. And you said hundreds of people saw this thing.
Yeah. And their reports, they're all incredibly similar. This wasn't just a few people seeing things differently. Everyone who saw it described it in pretty much the same way.
So we've got this huge triangular object, totally silent, gliding over this town, and it's captured on video by all these people.
Mm-hmm.
What are the experts saying? What could this thing be?
Well, there isn't one clear answer. Some people think that it could be some kind of super top secret military aircraft, something we're just not supposed to know about.
But wouldn't someone in the military have leaked something by now? I mean, secrets like that don't usually stay hidden forever.
You'd think so, but then again, these types of programs are incredibly secretive. It's possible that only a tiny handful of people, even within the military, know about them.
Okay, so let's say it's not a secret government project. What else could it be?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. Some researchers are wondering if we're dealing with extraterrestrial technology, something so advanced that it's beyond anything we can even imagine right now.
Extraterrestrial? You mean like aliens?
I know it sounds crazy, but it's a possibility. Remember all those patterns we've seen? The technology seems so far beyond anything we have, and the way they move, it's like they're not even following the same rules of physics. If it's not something built by humans, it really makes you wonder what else it could be.
I'm trying to wrap my head around all of this. The historical sightings going back over a century, the same descriptions of these triangle-shaped objects, military encounters, and now video evidence. It's a lot to process.
It is a lot, but that's the whole point, isn't it? This is a phenomenon that challenges everything we think we know. It pushes us to consider possibilities that we might not have even thought of before. It's exciting and a little scary all at the same time.
You know what? I'm starting to think that maybe some of the skepticism around UFOs comes from this fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
It's easier to dismiss something as a hoax or a mistake than to actually grapple with the possibility that there might be things out there we just don't understand yet.
I think you're right. We're often afraid of what we don't understand, but as scientists, as explorers, we have to be willing to question everything, to keep an open mind.
So where do we go from here? What can we learn from all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that, we can't just dismiss all these reports as hoaxes or misidentifications. There's something real here, a genuine mystery that needs to be investigated seriously.
So you're saying we need to approach this with the same rigor we would any other scientific investigation, but also with a sense of curiosity and wonder.
Exactly. We need to gather data, we need to analyze the evidence, and we need to consider all the possibilities, no matter how strange they may seem. And we need to listen to the witnesses, the people who have had these experiences. Their stories are important pieces of this puzzle.
I agree. Their experiences are valuable data points. So we've covered a lot of ground here. The history, the evidence, the opinions of experts.
Yeah.
What about the future? What do you think the next chapter of this story looks like?
Well, it's tough to say for sure, but I think we're at a kind of a turning point in how we understand this phenomenon. Public interest in UFOs is bigger than ever, and that's pushing for more transparency, more investigation.
It's true. There are more documentaries and news reports about UFOs than ever before. And it seems like people are more willing to talk about their own experiences without being afraid of ridicule.
And with technology constantly advancing, we're getting better at capturing evidence. Think about all those smartphones out there. Everyone's walking around with a high-definition camera in their pocket.
So you're saying that, we can expect to see more videos, better evidence, more people coming forward with their stories in the future. That's pretty exciting. Do you think we'll ever get, concrete answers about what these things are?
I'm optimistic. With continued research, open-mindedness, maybe a little bit of luck, I think we'll eventually figure this out.
It would be incredible to finally get definitive answers, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
To know for sure whether these objects are, secret government projects, some kind of advanced technology that we haven't developed yet, or maybe even something from another world.
Absolutely. It would change everything. But even if we never get all the answers, the journey of exploring these mysteries is valuable in itself. It makes us question, it makes us think, it makes us wonder about our place in the universe.
I love that way of looking at it. It's not just about the destination, it's about the journey of discovery.
Exactly. And, speaking of discoveries, there are some fascinating accounts in the National UFO Reporting Center files you provided, particularly the ones about, more recent events. And what makes these even more impactful is that they come from people just like you and me, everyday people who have had these extraordinary experiences.
Okay. Give me some highlights. What are some of the most interesting details you found?
Well, there's this report from the Palouse region of eastern Washington state that's pretty incredible. A mother was driving home with her 6 kids late one night, and they saw 3 triangular objects moving silently over a field. Each one had this bright light at the front.
6 kids in the car?
Yeah.
Oh, I can only imagine how freaked out they must have been.
The mother said it was terrifying. She was so shaken up by the experience that she was, afraid to go outside after dark for days.
I can totally understand that.
Yeah.
Seeing something like that would definitely make you question
Yeah.
everything. It must make you feel incredibly vulnerable, like your understanding of reality has been turned upside down.
It's a common reaction. These encounters can be really disorienting.
Okay, so that's a pretty unsettling account from Washington State. Are there any other notable sightings from other parts of the country?
Well, there's this report from Kirkland, Washington. This one's also pretty creepy. A woman was driving home late one night and noticed these, weird lights following her car.
Hmm.
As she pulled into her driveway, she looked up and saw this, dark triangular object right over her head.
Over her driveway. That's way too close for comfort.
It was a very close encounter. The woman described the object as completely silent, with 2 large white lights at the front and a red light in the center.
These details are so vivid. It's like you can picture exactly what these people saw. It makes you realize that these aren't just stories. There are real experiences that have had a profound impact on people's lives.
That's the power of firsthand accounts. They really, they transport us into the experience, help us understand what it was like to be there.
Okay, so those are some pretty unsettling accounts from Washington State. Are there any other notable sightings from other parts of the country?
There's one from Chalice, Idaho, that I think you'll find interesting. It involves 4 hunters who were camped out in a really remote area.
Hunters, huh? I feel like they'd be pretty level-headed guys. Not the type to, imagine things.
Exactly. These weren't UFO enthusiasts looking for something in the sky. They were experienced outdoorsmen, people who were used to being out in nature, familiar with the night sky.
So what do they see?
Well, one of the hunters went outside to get some food from his truck when he saw this massive, dark, triangular shape right above him.
Whoa, hold on. He just came face to face with this thing out of nowhere.
That's what happened. He was so startled that he fell to the ground and started yelling for his friends to come outside.
I can imagine they thought he was losing it.
Probably. But then they all saw it, this huge triangle with bright white lights at each corner, just gliding silently over their campsite. It must have been a surreal experience.
So they reported this. I feel like a lot of people in that situation wouldn't, for fear of being ridiculed or labeled as, crazy.
They did report it. They contacted the FAA. And here's the really strange part. The next day, an F-16 flew over their campsite.
No way. You're saying the military actually responded to their report.
It definitely seems like a possibility. Whether the F-16 was there specifically because of their sighting or it was just a coincidence, it adds an extra layer of mystery to this case.
That's wild. It really seems like these triangular UFOs are everywhere.
They really are. And the deeper we go into these reports, the more we start to see how widespread this phenomenon really is.
Okay. We've talked a lot about, like, recent sightings, but I'm really fascinated by some of those older cases, the ones that go back decades, even centuries. Are there any that stand out to you as, like, especially compelling or just plain strange?
I keep thinking about that quote from the Wisconsin State Journal back in 1953, the one that mentioned a Great Flying Triangle scare in England in 1894.
Yeah. That one really piqued my interest, too. What's the story there?
Well, it turns out that in the late 1800s, there was this whole wave of sightings of these strange objects over England. People were calling them airships.
Airships. You mean like those big blimps?
Not quite. People were describing something much more advanced and maneuverable than the airships that were around at the time. And a lot of people were reporting seeing triangular objects.
Wait a minute. So they were seeing these things even before anyone had figured out powered flight. That just doesn't make any
It
sense.
really doesn't, does it? It challenges everything we think we know about, technological development.
Okay, I'm hooked. What are some of the details from these 1894 sightings?
One of the most striking accounts was from a British admiral. He described seeing a large disc with something sticking out, like a tail.
A disc with a tail. That's a strange combination.
It is. It doesn't fit any known aircraft at all.
So what could it have been?
It's really hard to say. Some researchers think it might have been a really early prototype of some kind, maybe even a secret military project.
A secret project back in 1894. Doesn't that seem a little far-fetched?
It might seem that way, but, governments have always been interested in getting a technological edge, and that often means developing things in secret.
Okay, so secret project or something even weirder. What else happened during this airship scare?
Well, there are tons of reports of triangular objects all over England and Scotland. People were really freaked out by them.
Triangular objects. Again, it really seems like that shape keeps popping up throughout history, doesn't it?
It does, and it's one of the most consistent features of these UFO reports.
So what were people saying back then about what these objects were?
There were all kinds of theories. Some people thought they were airships from other countries, like Germany or France, trying to spy on England. Others thought it might be some kind of natural phenomenon, like weird cloud formations or something.
But no one really knew for sure.
Nope. And that's part of what makes these historical cases so fascinating. They're still unsolved mysteries.
Okay, let's talk about that story from 1936.
Yeah.
The one where the guy saw a triangle when he was a teenager.
Oh, yeah. Holgerberg. His story is such a good reminder that these sightings haven't just been happening for the past few decades. They've been going on for a long time, but people haven't always felt comfortable talking about them.
So remind me of the details of this story. He was hitchhiking with a friend in Alaska when they saw this thing in the sky, right?
That's right. They thought it was a truck at first, but as it got closer, they realized it was something completely different.
What did they see?
A triangular object surrounded by this blue-green light, and it was making this strange buzzing sound. Berg later said it sounded like a turbine engine winding down.
Interesting. Even back then, they were associating these objects with, like, advanced technology.
Yeah. It makes you wonder what they were seeing. Could it have been some kind of prototype, maybe even a secret military aircraft that was being tested in a remote area like Alaska?
Or something even more extraordinary.
The possibilities are pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
So what happened next?
Well, the object flew right over them, and they said they could see multicolored lights on the back.
That must have been a pretty scary experience.
It was. Burke and his friend were so scared they dove into a snowbank to hide.
I don't blame him. I'd probably do the same thing. It's sad, though. Berg was ridiculed for years whenever he tried to tell people about what he saw.
It's a shame, but unfortunately, it's a common experience for people who report these kinds of things. They're often afraid to share their stories because they worry about being judged or dismissed. But these firsthand accounts are so valuable. They give us a glimpse into what people are really experiencing and help us understand this phenomenon better.
Okay, I'm ready for more. What else do you have from those historical files?
Let's jump ahead to the 1950s, the era of the classic flying saucer sightings.
The golden age of UFOs?
Exactly. Most people think of round disc-shaped objects when they think about that era. But there are actually quite a few reports of triangular UFOs back then, too.
Really? I always thought the triangular sightings were, like, mostly a more recent thing.
It's a common misconception, but as we've seen, these reports go back much further than most people realize.
So what are some of the most interesting cases from the 1950s?
Well, there's a case from Texas in 1953 that's especially interesting. Several people reported seeing something they called a flying arrowhead in the sky.
A flying arrowhead. That's such a specific shape, you can't really mistake that for anything else.
Exactly. And it doesn't match any known aircraft from that time.
So what did they actually see?
Well, they described a large triangular object with a pointed nose and swept back wings moving silently through the sky.
Silent movement again. That really seems to be one of the main characteristics of these triangular UFOs.
It's one of the most consistent features in all of these reports. It's almost as if these objects are somehow defying the laws of physics as we understand them.
Okay, so what do you think this thing could have been?
You know, it's hard to say for sure. Some researchers think it might have been some kind of prototype, maybe a secret military project that was being tested, but again, it's just speculation. We don't have any concrete answers.
Okay. Let's move on to another case. What else is there from the 1950s?
Okay. This next one is pretty wild. In 1954, a commercial airline pilot named Captain Howard had a close encounter with what he called a flying jellyfish over the Pacific Ocean.
A flying jellyfish. That sounds crazy.
It does. Captain Howard and his crew were flying a Pan Am Stratocruiser from Tokyo to Honolulu when they saw this strange object.
So what did it look like?
Well, at first they said it was pear-shaped, but then it started to change shape right in front of their eyes. First, it became a delta wing aircraft, and then it morphed into like a giant telephone receiver.
Whoa, hold on. You're saying it was shape-shifting in midair?
That's what the witnesses reported.
That's incredible.
It really is, and it's something we can't explain with our current understanding of technology.
So what happened next?
Captain Howard contacted air traffic control, and they actually scrambled a jet interceptor to check it out.
So the military thought it was serious enough to send a fighter jet after it.
They did, but before the jet could reach it, the object just vanished.
Just like that. Disappeared into thin air?
Exactly. It was as if it ceased to exist.
Okay, so we've got shape-shifting objects, silent movement, sudden disappearances. These 1950s cases are getting weirder and weirder.
They really are. It's like we're looking through a window into another reality, one that operates by rules we don't yet understand.
All right, I'm ready for more. What other mind-bending cases do you have from this era?
Okay. Let's fast forward a few years to 1957. There's a case from Camarillo, California that really makes you question how these objects move.
What happened in Camarillo?
A woman named Connie Foster reported seeing a triangular object moving slowly across the sky. But here's the thing. It was flying with the base of the triangle forward.
Wait a minute. The base forward. That doesn't make any sense. How could something fly like that?
Exactly. It's like these objects aren't limited by the same laws of aerodynamics that govern our airplanes.
What are we supposed to make of that?
It suggests that there might be something truly extraordinary going on here, something that operates on principles that we haven't even begun to grasp.
That's mind-blowing. I can see why these triangular UFOs have captured people's imaginations for so long.
Yeah.
They represent something beyond our understanding, a mystery that we're still trying to unravel.
They're a captivating mystery, that's for sure. And as we delve deeper into these reports, I think we'll uncover even more compelling evidence and thought-provoking questions.
Okay, I'm hooked. Let's keep going.
All right. Well, the 1960s brought a whole new wave of sightings, and some of these cases are truly remarkable.
All right. Let's dive into the 60s. What were people seeing during this era?
Well, we start off in September 1960 with a series of sightings in Connecticut. The Hartford Courant newspaper even ran an article titled "New Saucer Twist: Flying Triangle Seen in State," describing multiple people seeing this large triangular object moving silently in the night sky.
Multiple witnesses. That always adds credibility, doesn't it?
It does, and it's a recurring theme in a lot of these cases.
So what did they say they saw in Connecticut?
One witness, Richard Ireton, said he saw the object hovering near Cornfield Point. He described it as moving back and forth horizontally and then up and down, all without a sound. He even compared its speed to a Piper Cub plane.
So it was moving slowly, intentionally, not like a typical aircraft.
Exactly. That's what makes these sightings so compelling. These objects seem to defy our understanding of how things should move.
Were there any other sightings in Connecticut around this time?
Just a few days later, there was another report, this time from Madison, Connecticut. The New Haven Register covered a story about a witness who saw a large triangular object with a bright light at each corner moving silently over the town. He was so amazed by it that he even drew a sketch of what he saw.
A sketch from 1960. I'd love to see that.
It's really interesting. It shows how seriously people were taking these sightings back then. They weren't just dismissing them as nothing. They were documenting what they were seeing.
Okay, so we've got these intriguing cases from Connecticut. What about other parts of the world? Were people seeing these triangular UFOs in other places?
Absolutely. Just 5 days after those Connecticut sightings, someone reported seeing a triangular object over Tyneside in northeast England.
Across the Atlantic. So it wasn't just an American phenomenon.
Not at all. These sightings were happening all over the globe. It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. What happened in Tyneside?
A man named Robert Hall was walking home from work when he saw this huge triangular object with bright lights on each corner hovering silently in the sky.
That sounds so familiar.
I know, right? The descriptions are so consistent, even across different continents and decades.
What happened next?
Well, Hall watched the object for several minutes before it just took off at incredible speed.
That sudden acceleration again. It's like these things have some kind of technology that we just can't even fathom.
It's baffling, isn't it? How can something go from a dead start to super fast in an instant?
Did anyone else see this thing in Tyneside?
There were a few other reports from the area, but they were all dismissed as sightings of a tanker aircraft refueling other planes.
Dismissed as something ordinary. It seems like that happens a lot with these sightings, doesn't it?
It does, but as we've seen, a lot of these reports just don't fit those simple explanations.
Okay, so those are a few compelling cases from the early 1960s. What else happened during this decade?
Well, there's a case from 1965 that I find really interesting because it involves a scientist named Dr. James McDonald. He was a senior physicist at the University of Arizona.
A scientist. That's a pretty credible witness.
Yeah, he was a respected figure in his field, and he was one of the first scientists to actually take UFO sightings seriously and advocate for proper scientific investigation.
So what was Dr. McDonald's experience?
He was driving home one evening in Arizona when he saw this large triangular object with bright lights at each corner moving slowly and silently across the sky.
Not those triangular objects again. It's like they're everywhere.
They really are. It's hard to ignore the sheer number of reports, especially when they come from people like Dr. McDonald who have no reason to fabricate a story.
So what did Dr. McDonald do?
Well, he stopped his car and got out to get a better look. He watched the object for several minutes before it suddenly disappeared.
So he had a close encounter with a triangular UFO. And this was a respected scientist,
Yeah.
someone trained to observe and analyze data.
Exactly. And his experience changed his perspective. He became convinced that this phenomenon was something truly extraordinary and that it deserved serious scientific attention.
Did he ever talk publicly about his experience?
He did. He became a vocal advocate for UFO research, giving lectures and even testifying before Congress.
Wow. A scientist speaking out about UFOs back then. That must have been pretty controversial.
It was, but it shows that some people, even those in the scientific community, were beginning to recognize that this phenomenon was something that couldn't be ignored.
So that was 1965. What other notable sightings were there during the 1960s?
Well, there's one from 1967 that really stands out. A family in Exeter, New Hampshire, reported seeing a large triangular object with bright lights at each corner hovering silently over their house.
Hovering over their house. That's a bit too close for comfort. I'd be terrified.
It was a scary experience for them. They said the object was huge, much, much bigger than any airplane they'd ever seen.
Yeah, so what happened?
Well, the object hovered for a few minutes, and then it just suddenly shot off at high speed.
That rapid acceleration, again, it's like they have some kind of advanced propulsion system that we just can't comprehend.
It's one of the most perplexing aspects of these sightings.
Were there any other reports from New Hampshire around this time?
Actually, there was a whole wave of sightings in the Exeter area in the late 1960s, and a lot of them involved these triangular objects.
It's a wave of sightings. It's almost like these things appear in clusters, doesn't it? Like they're drawn to certain areas for a period of time.
Yeah. It's an interesting pattern, isn't it? Makes you wonder if there's something about certain locations that attracts these objects, or if maybe their appearances are somehow coordinated.
Okay, so we've got these compelling cases from the 1960s. What about the 1970s? Did the triangular UFO sightings continue during that decade?
Oh, they definitely continued. In fact, the reports became even more widespread with more detailed descriptions and closer encounters. We're going to see sightings from all over the world.
I'm ready for more. Bring on the 1970s.
Okay. Let's start with a case from 1973 that really highlights how strange these triangular objects can behave. It happened in North Haven, Connecticut, and involved a witness named Carl Faint.
Carl Feind, what happened to him?
Well, Faint was driving home late one night when he saw this large triangular object hovering silently over a field.
Another hovering triangle. They really seem to like doing that, don't they?
They do. It's like they can defy gravity without any effort.
So what did Fate do?
Well, he stopped his car and got out to get a better look. And as he watched, the object started moving toward him slowly and silently.
Moving towards him. That would be terrifying.
It was. Faint said he felt this overwhelming sense of dread as the object approached.
What happened next?
Just as the object was about to reach him, it suddenly shot straight up into the sky at incredible speed and disappeared.
Vanished without a trace. That's a recurring theme with these things, isn't it?
It is. It's like they can just dematerialize at will.
So what do you think Fate saw that night?
It's hard to say for sure, but his description of the object and how it moved is very similar to a lot of other reports of triangular UFOs.
Okay. That's a pretty creepy encounter. Were there any other notable sightings in 1973?
There's one from Berwyn Heights, Maryland that I find really intriguing. A woman named Ruth Edwards reported seeing a large triangular object with bright lights on each corner hovering silently over her backyard.
Another hovering triangle. They really do seem to have a thing for backyards, don't they?
They do. It's like they're curious about us, observing us from a distance.
So what did Edwards do?
She called the police.
Mm-hmm.
And two officers actually responded to her call.
So the police were involved in this case?
They were. And they confirmed Edwards' sighting. They said they saw the same object hovering silently over her house.
So we've got multiple witnesses, including police officers, all seeing the same thing. That's pretty strong evidence, isn't it?
It is. And it makes it much harder to dismiss the case as just a simple misidentification or a hoax.
Okay. Those are two pretty interesting cases from the early 1970s. What else happened during this decade?
Well, there's a case from 1976 that's particularly noteworthy. It involves a commercial airline pilot named Captain William Schaffner, who had an encounter with a large triangular object while flying over Lake Michigan.
Another airline pilot. They seem to have a lot of these UFO encounters, don't they?
They do. And Captain Schaffner's encounter is one of the most well-documented cases that we have.
So what were the details of this encounter?
Well, Captain Schaffner and his co-pilot were flying a Northwest Orient Airlines Boeing 727 from Minneapolis to Chicago when they saw this large triangular object with bright lights on each corner moving slowly and silently next to their plane.
Next to their plane. That must have been pretty unnerving.
It was. Captain Schaffner said the object was massive, way, way bigger than any aircraft he'd ever seen.
So what happened next?
Captain Schaffner contacted air traffic control, but they couldn't.
Coast to coast. These things were everywhere. It's like they were on a tour of the United States.
It's true. And the details that people were reporting, they got even more specific, Like people were describing strange sounds and unusual movements and even close encounters.
Okay, let's start with California. What happened there in 1978?
Well, there's this case from Auburn that really stands out. This one involved a guy named Brian Metcalf. He was an air traffic controller for the FAA at the time.
Air traffic controller. You can't get much more credible than that. I mean, you spend all day, every day looking at the sky. They know what they're talking about.
Exactly. And Metcalf's sighting is one of the most interesting ones from this time.
Okay, so what did he see?
He was driving home from work when he saw this big triangular object with 3 bright lights on each corner moving silently above the highway.
Another silent triangle. It's like a running theme at this point.
It really is.
So what did Metcalf do?
He stopped his car and watched the object for a few minutes. He described it as being about the same size as a Boeing 747, but completely silent.
A silent 747?
It's
impossible.
That's the thing, isn't it? A lot of these sightings just don't make sense with what we know about how things should work.
So what did Metcalf think he saw?
Oh, he was absolutely convinced that it was a real UFO. And, his expertise as an air traffic controller, it really makes you think twice about dismissing it as just, oh, a misidentified plane.
I agree. If someone who spends their life tracking aircraft says they saw a UFO, I mean, that's pretty compelling.
Yeah.
What else happened in 1978?
Well, there's a case from Tewksbury, New Jersey that really highlights the strange nature of these triangular UFO encounters. A family reported seeing a massive triangular object hovering right above their house during a power outage.
A power outage. That makes it even creepier.
It does, doesn't it? The family said this thing was bigger than several Boeing 747s put together,
Yeah.
covered in hundreds of lights just hovering silently in the sky.
Bigger than several 747s. That's mind-bogglingly huge EE.
It really is. This thing must have been absolutely massive.
So what happened next?
The object hung there for a few minutes, and then it just suddenly disappeared. And right when it vanished, the power came back on.
The power came back on. You think there could be a connection between the UFO and the power outage?
It's possible. There have been a lot of reports of UFOs being linked to like electromagnetic disturbances. Maybe there's something about their technology or the way they operate that interferes with our electrical systems. It's a thought.
Okay. That's a pretty bizarre case in New Jersey. What about Pennsylvania? You mentioned there were sightings there in 78.
Yeah, there were a bunch of sightings in Mount Union, Pennsylvania that really demonstrate how persistent these triangular UFOs can be.
Persistent. What do you mean by that?
Well, people in Mount Union were reporting seeing a triangular object described as, glowing and moving very fast and quietly, multiple times over several weeks.
Multiple sightings for weeks. That's pretty unusual. Most sightings are just, one-time events.
It is unusual. It suggests that these things might, hang around in certain places for a while, not just pass through quickly.
What do people say about these objects?
They said they were, moving fast and in erratic patterns, completely silent, and often changing direction suddenly.
Sounds like they were putting on quite a show.
Yeah.
I wonder, what was going on in Mount Union that attracted so much attention?
That's the question, isn't it? What makes these things, choose certain places?
So did anyone officially investigate these sightings in Mount Union?
The local police were pretty skeptical at first, but after a while, even they had to admit that something strange was going on. Too many people they knew and trusted were reporting the same thing for them to just ignore it.
You know what they say? Even in small towns, secrets don't stay buried forever.
That's for sure. And especially when it comes to something as dramatic as UFO sightings, word gets around.
You mentioned an Alabama sighting from 78. Tell me more about that one.
Yeah. This is the Demopolis case, and it's particularly interesting because a woman had a close encounter with a triangular UFO that lasted for over half an hour.
Half an hour. That's amazing. Most of these sightings we've talked about were just, quick glimpses, maybe a few seconds at most.
Yeah, it really is a long time to observe something like that. And what makes it even more credible is that it wasn't just one person who saw it. Multiple witnesses, including police officers, all saw the same thing.
All right, lay it on me. What happened in Demopolis?
Well, a woman named Bobby Hines was woken up by her dogs barking at around 4 in the morning. She looked outside and saw this big, bright object hovering above the trees near her house. She got her husband up, and they both watched this thing for a while.
So what did they see?
They described it as triangular, about the size of a small house and glowing with this blue-white light.
Another silent hovering triangle. It's like they're all reading from the same playbook, isn't it?
The similarities between these reports are striking, aren't they? It's like they're all describing the same type of object, even though they're seeing it in completely different places and times.
So what happened next?
Well, the objects hovered there for a bit and then started moving towards the house in a kind of a zigzag pattern. Hines called the police, and 2 officers showed up.
And they saw it too.
They did. Both officers said they saw the same thing hovering near the house and then taking off towards the southeast.
So you have multiple witnesses, including police officers, all corroborating this sighting. It's hard to argue with that kind of evidence, even if it is strange.
I agree. When you have that many people, especially those who are, trained to observe and report, all saying the same thing, it makes it much, much harder to dismiss it as, oh, it's just a hoax or a mistake.
So we've covered a lot of ground with these sightings from the 1970s. It seems like those years were a real hot spot for triangular UFO activity.
They were, and this wave of sightings continued right into the 1980s with some truly incredible cases coming out of Europe.
Europe. Okay. Let's hop across the pond again. What were people experiencing in Europe during the 1980s?
Well, one of the most important events from this period was the Belgian UFO wave, which started at the end of 1989 and continued into 1990.
The Belgian UFO wave. I've heard about this. It was like a huge deal. What can you tell me about it?
It was. We're talking thousands of witnesses, multiple radar confirmations, and they even scrambled F-16 fighter jets to intercept these things.
Ooh. They sent F-16s after them. They must have been pretty concerned about what was going on.
They were definitely taking it seriously. The
Yeah.
Belgian Air Force did a full investigation, and they even reported their findings to NATO.
So what were people seeing in the skies over Belgium?
The most common description was of a large triangular object with those bright white lights on each corner.
Those silent hovering triangles again. They really do get around.
They do, and the Belgian sightings are some of the best documented examples of this phenomenon that we have.
What are some of the most interesting incidents from the Belgian wave?
Well, there was one where they scrambled two F-16s to try to intercept a triangular UFO that had been tracked on radar. The pilots locked their targeting systems onto this thing, but it suddenly accelerated, like incredibly fast, and just vanished.
Outmaneuvered by a UFO. Imagine being one of those pilots. Pretty humbling, I'd say.
You can bet it was.
So what did the Belgian Air Force say about all of this? Did they ever figure out what these things were?
Nope. They couldn't explain it. They looked at the possibility of conventional aircraft, weather phenomena, any other explanation that they could come up with, and none of it fit. They concluded that these objects were unidentified.
So we have an official government investigation that couldn't explain these sightings. That's pretty significant, don't you think?
It really is.
Yeah.
It adds a lot of weight to the idea that there might be something truly extraordinary going on here, something that we just don't understand yet. The Belgian UFO wave is one of those cases that really, sticks with you. One of those events that makes you realize that there's still so much about our world that we don't know.
Okay. We've traveled through a lot of history exploring some of the most significant sightings of triangular UFOs in the U.S., Europe, and all over the world. But what about more recent encounters? Are people still seeing these things today?
Absolutely. And with the technology we have now, we're seeing even more compelling evidence.
That makes sense. I mean, everyone has a camera in their pocket now.
Okay.
Let's talk about some of the more recent sightings. What are some of the most compelling cases from the past few decades?
Well, one that stands out is the 2004 Tinley Park, Illinois case. This was a mass sighting of a triangular UFO.
Tinley Park, yeah, I remember hearing about that. It was all over the news.
It was. Hundreds of people saw this large triangular object with bright lights at each corner moving silently over the town.
Another silent hovering triangle. You'd think they'd get tired of the same routine, wouldn't you?
You'd think. But these consistent descriptions are part of what makes this phenomenon so fascinating and also so baffling.
What makes the Tinley Park case so special?
Well, for one thing, there's video evidence. A bunch of people filmed this object, and experts have analyzed the footage.
Video evidence. That's not something you see very often with these kinds of sightings. It's usually just eyewitness accounts.
Exactly. And the videos from Tinley Park are really intriguing.
What do they show?
Well, you can clearly see this large triangular object with bright lights at each corner moving slowly and silently across the sky. There's no mistaking it for anything else. It's definitely not a plane or a helicopter or anything like that.
So we have video evidence, lots of witnesses,
Yeah.
and everyone's describing the same thing. What are the experts saying about the Tinley Park case?
They're stumped. They've ruled out all the usual suspects, conventional aircraft, weather phenomena, anything like that. They just don't have an explanation for it.
So another unexplained triangular UFO sighting. It's like these things have been with us for a long time, and we still have no idea what they are.
It's a mystery that continues to fascinate and challenge us. It makes us question everything we thought we knew about the world, and opens up the possibility that there might be something more out there, something beyond our current understanding.
It really does make you think, doesn't it? What other mysteries are out there waiting to be discovered? What else is possible?
That's the beauty of exploration. There's always something new to learn, something new to spark our curiosity, and that curiosity, that drive to understand the world around us is what pushes us forward, what leads to new discoveries and breakthroughs.
I love that. It's not just about finding the answers. It's about the journey of discovery itself.
It is. And as we wrap up our deep dive into triangular UFOs, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that we have to stay curious. We have to keep asking questions, and we have to be open to the possibility that there might be things out there that we just don't understand yet. Things that might even seem impossible.
Well said. And for all of you listening out there, what stands out to you from all of this? What's stuck with you? Maybe it's those early sightings, the ones that happened before we even had airplanes and helicopters. Or maybe it's the fact that these triangular shapes, they just keep appearing over and over again throughout history. Whatever it is that grabbed your attention, hold on to that feeling of wonder. It's that sense of wonder, that desire to explore the unknown that keeps us moving forward, that keeps us pushing the boundaries of what we think is possible.